Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, a tale of kindness and courage. Once upon a time, in a kingdom blanketed with snow-capped mountains and lush green forests, there lived a beautiful princess named Snow White. She had skin as fair as snow, lips as red as roses, and hair as black as ebony. Snow White was kind-hearted, gentle, and beloved by all the creatures of the forest. But sadly, her mother, the queen, had passed away when she was very young, and her father, the king, had remarried a beautiful but vain woman who soon became Snow White's stepmother. This new queen was incredibly vain, and possessed a magical mirror that she would often consult. Every day she would stand before it and say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And each time the mirror would reply, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." Hearing this would make the queen smile with satisfaction, as she loved being known as the most beautiful in the land. But as Snow White grew older, her beauty blossomed more and more, and her kind nature made her even more radiant. One day, when the queen asked her mirror the usual question, she was shocked when it replied, "My queen, you are beautiful, it's true, but Snow White is even fairer than you." The queen's heart burned with jealousy and anger. She could not bear the thought of anyone being more beautiful than her, especially not Snow White. In a fit of rage, the queen called for her huntsman and commanded him to take Snow White into the forest, never to return. "Bring back proof that she is gone," she demanded coldly. The huntsman, though loyal to the queen, felt sorry for Snow White, for he knew she was innocent and kind. When they were deep in the forest, he told Snow White of the queen's wicked plan. "Run, Snow White, run far away and never return to the castle," he said, sparing her life. Tears streamed down Snow White's face as she ran through the dark forest. The branches seemed to reach out like claws, and strange shadows danced under the moonlight, making her tremble with fear. Exhausted and frightened, she finally collapsed in a clearing where she lay down to rest. As dawn broke, she awoke to the sound of cheerful birds and noticed a tiny cottage nestled among the trees. It was a charming little house with a thatched roof, flower-filled window boxes, and a tiny chimney puffing out a gentle stream of smoke. Snow White, curious and in need of shelter, carefully opened the door and peeked inside. The cottage was cozy but quite messy, with 7 small chairs around a table and 7 little beds lined up against the walls. "Whoever lives here must be very small," she thought. Seeing that the place was untidy, she decided to clean up as a way of thanking the owners for letting her rest there. She swept the floor, dusted the furniture, and even prepared a simple meal from what little food she could find. As evening approached, the owners of the cottage returned. They were 7 dwarves who worked in the nearby diamond mines. Their names were Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey. Each dwarf had his own unique personality, and they were all very hard-working and kind-hearted. When they entered their home, they were surprised to find it spotless. "Who has been in our house?" Doc, the eldest dwarf, wondered aloud. The dwarfs began searching the cottage and soon discovered Snow White asleep across 3 of their tiny beds. Startled, they woke her gently, and she sat up, feeling both nervous and relieved. She explained her story, telling them about her stepmother, the queen, and how she had narrowly escaped. The dwarfs felt sorry for Snow White and offered her a place to stay, provided she helped them with chores around the house. Snow White gladly agreed, grateful to have found such kind friends. Days turned into weeks, and Snow White lived happily with the dwarfs. They would go off to the mines each day, and she would wave goodbye, reminding them to be careful. Then she would clean, cook, and tend to the little garden outside the cottage. She grew to love the dwarfs dearly, and they adored her in return. Snow White's laughter and warmth filled their home with joy. However, back at the castle, the wicked queen had once again asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" To her horror, the mirror replied, "Though you, my queen, are fair, there is someone with skin like snow, lips red as a rose, and hair black as ebony, who is now the fairest of them all, Snow White, who dwells with the Seven Dwarfs." Enraged that Snow White was still alive, the queen devised a sinister plan to get rid of her once and for all. Using her dark magic, the queen disguised herself as an old peddler woman. She prepared a basket of poisoned apples, their red skin shining temptingly, and made her way into the forest toward the dwarf's cottage. When Snow White was alone, the queen, disguised as the old woman, knocked on the door. "Good day, my dear. Would you like to try one of my delicious apples?" Snow White, always polite and trusting, did not suspect anything and accepted the apple. She took a bite, and as soon as the piece touched her lips, she fell to the floor, unconscious. The wicked queen cackled with delight, certain that she was now the fairest in the land once more. She disappeared back to the castle, confident her plan had worked. That evening, when the dwarfs returned home, they found Snow White lying on the floor, still and pale. They tried everything they could to wake her, but it was no use. Heartbroken, they laid her in a glass coffin and placed it on a hill surrounded by flowers, where they kept watch over her day and night, mourning the loss of their dear friend. One day, a prince from a neighboring kingdom was riding through the forest when he came upon the dwarfs guarding the glass coffin. He was immediately struck by Snow White's beauty and sorrow for her tragic fate. The dwarfs told him her story, and he felt a deep compassion for the lovely princess who had been wronged. With great gentleness, the prince lifted Snow White and kissed her forehead, bidding her a heartfelt farewell. But as he did so, the piece of poisoned apple dislodged from her throat, and Snow White's eyes fluttered open. She sat up, looking around with wonder, as the dwarfs and the prince cheered with joy. Overcome with happiness, Snow White thanked the dwarfs for all their kindness and bravery. The prince, who had fallen in love with her at first sight, asked Snow White if she would return to his kingdom with him. Snow White looked to the dwarfs, and with their warm blessing she accepted. The dwarfs promised to visit her often, and with a tearful goodbye, they sent her off with the prince. Snow White and the prince rode back to his castle, where they were married in a grand celebration. The kingdom rejoiced, and Snow White's kind heart and gentle spirit won the love of all the people. She never forgot her 7 little friends in the forest, who had shown her true kindness and loyalty. And as for the wicked queen, she was so furious upon learning of Snow White's happiness that she fled the kingdom, never to be seen again. Snow White and her prince lived happily ever after, and the dwarfs continued their lives in the cottage, knowing they would always have a special place in her heart. And thus, in a land of love, friendship, and kindness, peace reigned, and Snow White's story was told for generations as a tale of courage, kindness, and the power of true beauty.